For some reason I've been invited to chair this debate, and it's a question rather than a motion. Is Israel an apartheid state? Maybe the reason I was asked is that in the early years of the century, I covered Israel, Palestine quite a lot, and got an interview with Yasser Arafat, and also, with some Israeli leaders, met some Israeli leaders as well, and it was a very interesting, sad but very, very interesting experience, and I'm looking forward to hearing our two speakers tonight, and when they've spoken we will invite you to ask questions, and I might even tolerate brief contributions, but not sermons. They're only for the church down the road. And at the end we'll allow the two bios to have the right of reply. And Mark Humphrys, distinguished academic, he will be doing some
slides,
visuals,
I guess.
Slides, yes, I'm trying to think of the word. And Richard Boyd Barrett, you probably never heard of him. He's a member of Parliament, and he has overcome his natural shyness to come here tonight and give his views on a controversial topic. I know that's so it's a treasure, this moment, So I think we're taking you first, are we?
I lost the toss, yeah.
Yeah, okay, here we go. So.
Okay.
And it's all on the record, by the way, and it's being filmed as well.
Wow. Well, for better or for worse, the reason I got involved in politics was I was studying English literature in UCD at the time, and I had no intention of getting active in politics, and most certainly not of ending up as an elected public representative. But after my first year in UCD studying English literature, I literally stumbled into the first Palestinian Intifada in 1987. Myself and a few friends from this area, from Dún Laoghaire, Ballybrack, Sallynogan, we ended up getting tickets to Tel Aviv, and we hoped to get work on a kibbutz at the time, and I didn't know anything. I mean, literally nothing about the conflict at the time. I was very, very aware, and remain very aware, of the excuse me, of the historic crimes of the Nazis in particular, not exclusively Nazis, but particularly the Nazis against the Jewish people and the horrors that they had visited in the Nazi Holocaust. And my understanding, going there, insofar as, although I didn't go there for political reasons at all, I wanted to just go and work in a sunny place where the weather was good, because the weather was getting bad in London where we were working on building sites. And when I got there, overwhelmingly my sympathies would have been with the idea that it's a reasonable thing that a state has been established where Jewish people live to flee the horrors of the Holocaust. And I was very conscious that the idea of the Israeli state was a response to the horrors of anti-Semitism and the persecution of the Jewish people, and in particular the horrors of the Holocaust. But when I got there, within literally a couple of weeks, I was horrified at what I saw. And I ended up there for about a year, working down in the south, in the Negev, in a farm, Moshav. And very, very quickly I realised there's something really dreadfully wrong with this state. The we were working picking tomatoes and melons and various other things. But very, very quickly I began to see that what was going on was that the prosperity, and there was very significant prosperity in the farming sort of community we were working in, was based on absolutely disgusting exploitation of Palestinians and the displacement of the Palestinian population. I mean, within a few days I encountered Palestinian day labourers who came from refugee camps in Hebron, where they had lived in a refugee camp, people I was working with, since 1948, since their families had been expelled from what is now Israel. And they'd lived in a refugee camp ever since then. And they'd been denied any of the basic sort of opportunities to sort of flourish and progress as individuals and human beings. Some of them were students at the time, and their universities had been closed down because they were protesting against the awful situation they were living in. And you know, there's a complete lack of rights and a future and opportunities. Some of them were already graduated but had absolutely no employment opportunities, and the best they could do was come and work as day labourers. And for, you know, people here will have probably seen Strumpet City, and people will remember the scenes outside the docks, you know, where people would come and they'd stand pleading for work from employers in the docks at the beginning of the century in Dublin. And the employers would sort of say, yeah, we'll take you, we'll take you, we'll take you. That was one of the first things I witnessed a few days after I started working there, because buses of Palestinians would come at approximately a 2-hour journey from where they lived. They would arrive at about 7 or 8 in the morning, and they'd be picked or not picked to work like that. And it was literally like they were being treated like animals in the demeanour and the attitude of the farmers and how they treated them. And it wasn't long before I started to hear frequently used phrases like, the only good Arab is a dead Arab. I couldn't actually believe my ears when I would hear phrases like that. There was institutionalised wage discrimination. So if you were Jewish, you got paid more than I did for doing exactly the same work, and I got paid more than the Palestinians. There was absolutely sort of structured hierarchy with the Palestinians at the bottom. One of the more shocking days when I was working in the farm was we used to separate out melons and tomatoes and put them in boxes for export mostly. And it was most of the time we threw the rubbishy ones, the ones that had been damaged a bit, they were thrown out. And I remember one day the farmer says to me, here, put all the rubbish ones in this. And he just took out a big marker and he put Gaza. Like that. I didn't even know where Gaza was. And that was par for the course for the farmer I was working with. I remember another Irish guy who happened to be from the north came and worked for us, and one day he had sort of put this guy in charge of looking after all of us when we were doing the picking of the tomatoes. And one of the young Palestinians, he was only about 16, I think, was throwing tomatoes at another guy, and this Irish fella, hit him because he was supposed to be in charge, making sure that the work was being done. He hit him, and the farmer was absolutely thrilled with him. From that moment on, he was like given the foreman job. Such was the treatment of the Palestinian day labourers. So it was horrific, absolutely horrific. And then about 3 or 4 weeks after, I started to get accounts from these workers who were coming from Hebron about protests that were happening. So this was about November of 1987, which is just as the first Palestinian Intifada broke out. And I managed to hitch a lift on their advice and with some notes as to directions as to how to get there, managed to get up to the refugee camp where they lived. and there were barricades, and there was Israeli Defence Forces around the barricades, and I managed to get in behind them just with the assistance of locals who read the note that I've been given by my friends. So I got in and saw the conditions the Palestinians were living. And to be honest, in a way, if you want to answer the question for yourself rather than listen to the claim and counterclaim that you will hear from us, if you really want to see what apartheid looks like, really all you have to do is go into mainstream Israel, for want of a better word, where most Israelis live, look at the conditions they live in, look at the quality of their housing, the quality of their services, their general quality of life, and then take a trip a few hours over to the West Bank to areas like Hebron, or Ramallah, or Nablus, or Jenin, or worst of all, although you won't be allowed in, because the Israelis won't let you, into Gaza, and look at the conditions that the Palestinians are living in. The UN have described the situation in Gaza as a permanent humanitarian crisis. Such are the level of conditions, because of a blockade that Israel imposed on the people of Gaza after an election that they didn't like the results of. I think it was about 2006, where they've imposed a blockade and essentially starved, in effect, the people of Gaza from having access to the sort of resources they would need to reconstruct Gaza and to live any kind of dignified existence. And of course, over that period, successive military assaults on Gaza, which have destroyed much of the water infrastructure, huge amounts of housing, and have absolutely devastated Gaza to the point that more than 50% of people are living in poverty. And just, at every level, really, if you travel around the West Bank, the military checkpoints that are used to allow or not allow Palestinians to move around among fragmented bits of land that are supposed to be sort of, theirs, but, pockmarked with illegal Israeli settlements, with 700,000 Israeli settlers that have settled in that area since an accord was signed in the Oslo Accords, 1996, which were, supposedly going to form the basis of a just solution to this entire conflict, and where the West Bank, Gaza and so on would be allowed freedom and self-determination, but in fact a relentless policy of further settlement, colonial settlement of Palestinian territory and land, and all Palestinians effectively living under military control, military orders, checkpoints everywhere, living in very significant poverty, subject to arbitrary detention and arrest, brutality if they protest against their treatment. People only have to look at the horrific scenes and think about the mentality that could lead soldiers to attack the pallbearers of the coffin of Shireen Abu Akleh, the journalist who was shot, and see people physically attacking the people carrying her coffin, to get some kind of idea of a sick racist mentality that pervades the Israeli state. That is what I saw, and that is, to my mind, the essence of the state. That's not to say there's not lots of decent people, Israeli Jewish people, who don't like all of this stuff, but that is the essence and nature of the state. It is built and has been since its foundation on the relentless ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people, their displacement, and then the construction of a whole legal military infrastructure to segregate them, to push them further and further into small, impoverished enclaves in order to expand control by Israel and to settle more and more Israeli settlers on Palestinian land. And you know, it's not just like me saying it or my own experience, but if you actually read into what all of the people who founded the Israeli state were saying about what it was about, they were absolutely clear from the word go that this was what it's about. And a note that people should be aware of, which I think is interesting from an Irish point of view, is that Sir Ronald Storrs, who was the Governor General of Jerusalem in 1936, said, and he described very well why Britain was, what Britain saw the Zionist project being about. He said, we are going to create a loyal little Jewish Ulster in the Middle East to guard against a potentially hostile sea of Arabism. Now it's very interesting. Herbert Samuel was the Home Secretary in Ireland, and then later responsible for Palestine as well at the time of the Irish Revolution and so on, the time of the Black and Tans and the auxiliaries. The auxiliaries and Black and Tans that were operating in Ireland to crush the Irish Revolution were sent directly after the end of 21 to Palestine. Often with the same officers to use the same tactics. And so it wasn't a coincidence that Ronald Storrs used that analogy when he said we are going to create a loyal little Jewish Ulster in the Middle East to guard against a potentially hostile sea of Arabism. If you think about what Ulster meant and the settlement of Ulster, bringing in settlers in order to divide the population as a way of the British Empire controlling Ireland, the penal laws, all of that, exactly that methodology was then exported to Israel, and the Zionist movement, if you like, was the working out of that in this new context of the Middle East. But if you look at what some of the founders were saying at the time, Ben Gurion, first Prime Minister of Israel, says in 1937, we must, you know, very simply, we must expel the Arabs and take their places. You know, it's just as clear as that. Benny Morris, an Israeli historian, said Ben Gurion was right. Without uprooting the Palestinians, a Jewish state would not have arisen here. And of course all of this was enshrined, and this is really the essence of it all, because we can argue all sorts of things, and I don't doubt Mark will. But the essence of the apartheid nature of the state was established with the Israeli Law of Return in 1950, which was passed unanimously by the Knesset at the time, and it grants people of Jewish origin the right, even if they have no previous connection with the State of Israel, the right to go and claim citizenship in Israel, to be supported by the Jewish National Fund and various other things, to get land, get housing, get employment, and to be fully fledged citizens with all rights in the state of Israel. But simultaneously, Israel denies the right to now approximately 7 million Palestinians who are refugees, either in the West Bank or Gaza, or millions of others who are living in the most squalid conditions imaginable in refugee camps in Beirut, in Syria, in Jordan, and millions of others who are expelled as a diaspora across the world, and they are not, even though they have much more recent direct connections and indeed sometimes property in what is now called Israel, they are denied the right to return. So the entire state is built on the mass ethnic cleansing and displacement of the Palestinian people and the denial of the Palestinian people's right to return. And I would just put a very simple challenge to anybody who tries to defend the status quo in Israel, is to say, do you accept the right of the Palestinian diaspora to return? Do you accept it? And if not, why not? Because under international law, they have the right to return. There's UN resolutions acknowledging the right of Palestinians to return who were expelled. But that right is denied to Palestinians, millions of them, who are, as a result, left as permanent exiles without any identity, any citizenship of any description, just permanently exiled. But Israel confers a different set of rights on people who happen to be Jewish. And it's absolutely clear that at every level they prioritise people on a religious / ethnic basis of being Jewish or non-Jewish. Now to me, that's an insult to the memory of the Holocaust, because the Holocaust was the most horrific form of racism imaginable. But if we recognise the horror of what the Holocaust was, then surely our obligation and duty is to oppose every form of racial discrimination, wherever it manifests. And to say that somehow the awful horrors that Jewish people suffered somehow then justifies them creating a state which denies basic civil rights, and indeed, according to, and it's not even now just left-wingers who are saying this, now Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the UN Special Rapporteur for Palestine, and multiple others are now saying the Israeli state is an apartheid state. That it is a system that is based on systematic racism and domination of the Palestinian people at every level. And that is the terrible and tragic fact of the Israeli state. So I say, a state based on racism and apartheid, on ethnic cleansing, on the mass displacement of millions of people, does not have a right to exist. What does have a right to exist is equality for everybody. Simple idea. Equality for everybody. Whether you're Jewish, whether you're Arab, whether you're Christian or Muslim or someone of no belief, you should have equal rights within that state. And all of the millions of Palestinians who've been displaced across the world should have the right to return. And then let the people decide, democratically, with self-determination for everybody, what sort of state and society they want to live in. But Israel sets its face utterly against that, because the entire basis of the state is about displacement and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in order to make way for not an exclusively Jewish state, but where it is engineered in such a way that the Jewish people will always be a majority and will be given priority on the basis of their ethnic and religious status over all other people in that land. To me, that is completely unacceptable, and anybody who believes in human rights, who believes in freedom, who believes in self-determination, who believes in international law, should oppose the regime that exists in Israel, and just as happened in apartheid South Africa, insist that such a regime is isolated and boycotted by the international community until those apartheid and racist structures are dismantled and everybody has genuine freedom and self-determination in that land, whether they are Jewish, whether they are Palestinian, or whether they are Christian or any other belief or ethnic group, that there is genuine equality for everyone. That is the only just solution to the situation in Palestine.
So our next speaker is Dr. Mark Humphrys of Dublin City University, representing the Ireland-Israel Alliance.
Thanks. I just need a bit of setup here. So,
we won't go into it tonight, but he has a very distinguished family history
oh dear.
in terms of the Irish
Oh yeah.
War of Independence.
Right. So, sorry, everything shut down just while we were doing that. And then. Okay. No, come on. This guy goes to sleep. Right. We're getting there.
One problem Daniel O'Connell never had.
Excellent. Okay. Should we have the light a little bit lower?
Okay.
Is that okay? Do you want less light? Or what? You think it's okay? So I brought along a whole lot of things to show you, and my plan is to kind of negate Richard's entire political life and give the opposite side of the story. And I just want to say it's wonderful that the Eblana Club is hosting a debate, because we never get to debate. Us pro-Israel people and the anti-Israel people, you might categorise yourself as anti-Israel, but anyway, we never get to debate. Things flare up online, nothing much happens, but these debates are so rare, and it's great. So I hope we have some time tonight to go through things. So now there won't be any road to Damascus. I don't think you're going to agree with me. I'm going to agree with you. That's not what debate's about. It's about presenting different sides, and neutrals can chip in. So I think in a lot of the discourse on Israel, what's missing for me is almost always the fundamentals. And for me, the fundamentals are this. This is a list of Israeli elections since the beginning in the first one in 1949, if you can see that. I don't know if anyone... Anyway, I'll speak anyway. Now, this is an extraordinary list, because you think, well, doesn't every country have a list like this? Ireland does, for example. No, Spain does not. Spain was not a democracy in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Greece was not. Eastern Europe was not, famously. For half of this, Eastern Europe were not democracies. China's not a democracy today. Iran is not. Russia is not. Half the world are not democracies. This is very special in the world, to have a list like this. And this is why I support Israel, fundamentally. Everything else is secondary to the fact that it is a democracy, a free society, in a world and in a region where free societies are almost extinct. There are hardly any free societies in the Middle East, and they have held on as one of the rarest free societies in that entire region. Now, that's just a list of elections, and then we can go and we can look at how people rank Israel. So here's The Economist, who have a thing called the Democracy Index, and they try to rank states around the world by their level of democracy. And what's that country up at the top? That's Israel. So this is the Middle East. It's not the best country in the world, it's the best country in the Middle East. So if you're interested in the Middle East, this is kind of the last country you ought to be concerned with. These countries down here, Syria, Iran, etc., these are the countries you ought to be furious about. These are the countries whose people have no rights, where minorities and women and so on have no rights. Up here at the top, you have Israel, which has this fantastic democratic tradition. Now, I want to talk a bit more about that democratic tradition. This is a chart from Freedom House, who rank freedom in the world for different countries. And in the Middle East, one country out of 13 is free. Now, guess which country? It's Israel, of course. And look at all this purple. These are the worst countries in the world. This is the worst category in the world. And almost the entire Middle East is purple. Now, these are real things that Freedom House and The Economist are talking about. They're not just made up. Freedom of the Press Index. Again, this is freedom of the press. Israel, top country in the Middle East, despite all the problems and all the issues and whatever. It's nothing compared to these countries in which freedom of the press does not exist, in which the regimes do not believe in the entire concept of freedom of the press. So why are we even talking about Israel? We should spend all our time talking about Iran and Syria and Saudi Arabia and places like that. So Israel has done an amazing job, and here's a little map from Freedom House again. And they rank countries as free, partly free and not free. We don't have time to go into all the methodology, but we can see here in Europe, as part of this great zone of liberal democracy where people can vote and give out about the government, that green zone is quite rare in the world. And if you expand the map, you can see the other green countries. This zone of purple is just a zone, for me, that's just such a sad picture of the planet. And it is a real picture of the planet, where in country after country, you have regimes where you don't have the basic rights that we all have here in Ireland. We're one of the Greens, of course. And look at this tiny little green country here. I should probably point over there. Look at this tiny little green country in the middle. It's an island, an absolute island of freedom. Now, so so for me, this is not to be sniffed at. To achieve that, to even be a green country is an achievement for any country. To be a democracy for decades is a great achievement and something Israel should be proud of. So let us compare it to the Palestinian Authority. So here we have Israeli elections. This is a list of Israeli elections since the setting up of the PA. And as you can see here, in 1996, the PA had their first election. And what happened what happened afterwards? 2005, did Yasser Arafat suddenly decide that he believed in democracy and he better have an election after 9 years? No, you know what happened. You all know what happened. He died, right? That's why there was an election in 2005, because the guy died, the dictator died in 2004. He was never going to have an election if he lived up to 150. So 2005 and 2006, they had those two elections, and Abbas wins one and Hamas wins the other. And then what happens? Because what happens over here is you go into opposition and you say that the government are doing things wrong and you bide your chance for the next election. The next election? Who are you kidding? There'll never be another election. I mean, Abbas is still alive. Why would there be an election? He's not going to have an election. He's alive. So these are at least for the powerful, these are people who do not believe in democracy at all. Arafat never believed in it. Abbas does not believe in it. Hamas do not believe in it. None of these people believe in democracy. These people on the left, they believe too much in democracy. Look what they're doing. They're having an election this week, aren't they? Next week. When's the next election? First, I think.
1st of November.
There you go. So these people believe in democracy. These people don't. How about the people themselves? Even the belief of the people themselves in democracy is rather questionable. When's the last time you heard Palestinians complaining about the lack of a leader of the opposition and a working parliament? And there should be two of them, really. There should be a parliament in Gaza with the leader of the opposition, and then the parliament should be actually functioning on the West Bank with the leader of the opposition giving out about the Fatah and giving out about Hamas. I'm not even sure the people themselves particularly believe in that, but that may be getting a bit harsh. And certainly their Western supporters never talk about it. When have you heard a pro-Palestinian person in the West saying Hamas should have elections, at least within Gaza? I mean, they've been there since 2006 with no elections. So you never hear it. You don't hear it in Ireland, you don't hear it from any of the anti-Israel people. So why is there no call for elections? Well, from the Palestinian point of view, it's they don't believe in democracy. That's this weird Western idea that we believe in. They don't believe in it. And from the point of view of their Western supporters, they don't seem to care if these people have the vote or not. So let me move on from voting to society, because what I need to consider is what Israeli society consists of. Israeli society is a model of multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious existence, where Jews, Christians, Muslims can all worship freely, can change religion freely, can criticize religion, can be secular. Sure, there are frictions like in Ireland between secular and religious, but fundamentally it's a Western type of society where the individual is free. It's also the most Muslim Western country in the world. It's definitely, I regard it as a Western country because it's defining a Western country as a liberal democracy. It's 18% Muslim, which is a hell of a lot more Muslim than the USA, which is 1%, for example. So what does this mean? Do all these Muslims, do all these Arabs, most of the Arabs are Muslim, but not all. Do they not have the vote? Well, no, they do have the vote. Not only do they have the vote, at the moment they're in government. There is a minister, an Arab minister in the current government, which could all change this week. And there is an Arab party, like literally an Arab party for the first time in the Israeli government. Now, what kind of Mickey Mouse apartheid state is that? You're doing it completely wrong, this apartheid business, having your Arabs in government and Arab political parties, but that's how it is. The government is like a snapshot of Israel, where people coexist, all in freedom, all loving this kind of Western, if we call it Western, maybe it's wrong to call it Western, but it's the free society. So the cabinet includes an Arab Muslim, and he's not in the Arab party. He's in another party. He's in a mainstream party. So and he's Arab Muslim. He's not Arab Christian. So let's just have a look at a little chart just showing the voting here. Here's South Africa. Does my mouse you can vaguely see my nose.
Yeah.
Okay, so South Africa, blacks did not have the vote in South Africa. In Israel, Arabs had the vote, all of them. Turnout, well, turnout is turnout, it varies up and down. Arab seats, so blacks obviously have none in apartheid South Africa, 10% in Israel are Arabs, and actually it went up to 14%. And the number of Arabs is 20%. So 14% is pretty good. You're nearly there, that's kind of normal. So 14% of the Knesset being Arab politicians. Now, and Arabs don't even vote for Arab political parties. There are these kind of sectarian, you might call them if you're being uncharitable, Arab political parties, but there's also the mainstream political parties, and a ton of Arabs vote for them. Look at this, 30%, 28%. That's the number of Arabs voting for what they're calling Jewish parties, but I guess if enough Arabs are in them, they're just kind of general parties. They're mainstream parties, not just for Arabs. Okay, so here's an Arab politician, and I don't know how this guy fits into the anti-Israel people that you talk to who think Likud are something satanic or something. I'm not saying you think they're satanic, but you're probably against them. This is an Arab member, a hawkish member of the Likud party, and he actually became a minister not long ago. So how does he fit into this whole model that Arabs have a terrible time in Israel? We've got other people. There's an Arab Muslim who's an activist for Likud. Now, I mean, what can we say with this one, right? Apartheid, you're doing it wrong. You actually had an Arab president. So there was an Arab president. He was acting president in 2007, and he's Arab, and he was the president of Israel for a while, in a short period, acting president. Okay, maybe that was a freak of nature, right? You get an Arab president. Right, Supreme Court judge, anybody? Right, so here's an Arab Supreme Court judge, Salim Gibran, and not just on a one-off basis. For 14 years, he was a judge of the Supreme Court. I mean, that's a serious position. That's a serious position of power over Jews and everybody, Jews and Arabs, all citizens. Okay, well, that's interesting. How about this guy? So an Arab judge who jailed an Israeli president. I mean, how many people in Ireland even know this happened? An Israeli president was convicted of a sexual assault, and the judge who jailed him was Arab. So that's this fellow here, George Kara, who jailed the Israeli president for rape. So how can that happen? Well, that can happen in a society like ours, where everybody has equal rights. That's how that kind of thing can happen. Now, here's a great little tweet from somebody I follow, and he says, anti-Semites say Jews control the bank. We've really messed up, guys, because the head of the biggest bank in Israel is an Arab Muslim. And that's true. The head of Bank Leumi, appointed in 2019, is an Arab Muslim. So obviously they're doing the international conspiracies wrong as well, and letting the Arab Muslims in on those too. Here's another guy. He's not just a doctor, he's the coronavirus czar. He's setting the rules for coronavirus for every Jew in the country during the coronavirus crisis. And this is, he had a great career behind him, Salman Zarqa. And then he was appointed, I think he's still the coronavirus czar at the moment, as we speak. So he's Arab. Then we have an Arab hospital head. It goes on and on. Okay, so given all of these people, this guy treats IDF soldiers, Jewish doctors work under him. So all of these powerful people, Jewish people work underneath them. They're subordinates, and that's perfectly normal. And they're not getting paid less, I'd say, contrary to the apple pickers or whatever. These guys are getting paid serious money. So they're not getting paid less than their subordinates. So, okay, so that's pretty amazing. And then you have cultural things as well. And there's some lovely things here. I've an endless series of these, but the current captain of the football team is a Muslim. So how does that even happen? That the captain of the football team is a Muslim, but that is actually reality right now. The next one is to say, given all of this, so are these just a tiny number of Arabs who are doing well, and most Arabs are seething with resentment at the awful state they have to live in? Well, not really. I mean, look at this poll. 65% of Israeli Arabs are proud to be Israeli. So, you know, again, how many people around the world would be absolutely shocked by that poll? There's not 65% of Israeli Arabs want to destroy Israel or something. It's 65% are proud to be what? To be Israeli, right? That's, you know, and so even the word Palestinian is viewed as an insult by many of the Arab population of Israel, who say, no, I'm an Israeli Arab. And I'm proud of this country that I was born in and has given me opportunities and that I love. So Arabs even try to move into Israel and escape the PA. There's been thousands of them making sure that they're going to live under Israeli rule because Israeli rule gives them this. This is life expectancy of Arabs and I think some other groups, but mainly Arabs. And right at the top are Arab Israelis, the highest life expectancy in the Arab world. Now, isn't that wonderful? And not only is that great, but to be honest, I mean, you know, isn't this something for everyone to be proud of? Everyone that's involved in this, you know, that Israel can be proud of these numbers, that they're not treating the Arab population. There's nearly 2 million Arabs, by the way, in Israel. They're not treating them as serfs or slaves or something. So now here's the ethnic cleansing put in sarcastically, of course, but people talk about the ethnic cleansing of the Arabs. So here's the appalling ethnic cleansing of the Arab Muslims. So just look at the Muslim column, which is down here. So we have 500,000 in 1980, and we 1.6 million there, and the last I heard is 1.9 million, the last estimate. Oh no, that's just Muslims. No, it's 1.9 for all Arabs, yeah. So it's 1.7 or whatever. So you know, what kind of ethnic cleansing is that, or what kind of country is that, where the population of Arab Muslims can absolutely explode over the decades? It's just it doesn't fit the narrative. Here's the ethnic cleansing of the Arabs of Jerusalem, who've been driven from an appalling tiny number of people in the orange here up to this huge amount here. So they've been sadly vastly increased in numbers, but I guess the ethnic cleansing will kick in at some point and they'll start reducing. That's Jerusalem. So many Arabs are proud of what they've achieved, and actually they have achieved, I think there's one thing on this, or maybe it's elsewhere, but Arabs are really highly represented as undergrads now in Israeli universities. They're nearly at 20%. Okay, now I want to talk about Gaza. What was that swimming pool? Okay, so look, let's say Israeli Arabs are doing fine, and finally the sort of promise of this liberal democracy has been achieved in Israel, and the Arabs who are lucky enough to be in Israel are having a great life, and they have all the possibilities of anybody in a rich, modern country. Well, isn't it still appalling in Gaza and the West Bank? So yeah, we've got to look at these things, if I'm not too bad for time. Richard said that the Gaza was in a condition of absolute devastation, had been destroyed, that people were starving. Well, here's a picture of Gaza that I found at a site called Most Beautiful Places in Gaza. And there were loads of pictures like this, loads of swimming pools and cafes and shops and hotels sitting around there when there's no war on. Absolutely, it's horrible. Any place is absolutely appalling when there's a war on. But when there's no war on, places like this exist. It's a real photo. They didn't make it up. And here's another one. This is a real hotel in Gaza. It's a real picture. You can follow my links. Now, let's go on TripAdvisor and find the best things to do in Gaza. You literally can. And you can look at the best restaurants, the best hotels, and you'll find, whoops, we barely have time for the West Bank. But anyway, look, we'll see. Okay, here's a beautiful restaurant. I can't play the video. It's genuinely nice. A lovely hotel. It's a genuinely nice place. There are lovely places in Gaza, and there's a channel, an account on Twitter I follow called Imshin, and what she does is the Gaza you don't see, and she always goes looking at nice things in Gaza that you wouldn't think about, you wouldn't see in the media because they don't fit the narrative, and she discovered 640 holiday chalets that families use in Gaza. So these are actual real places, they actually exist. and they could be on your newspaper. Now, again, if you don't believe me, go watch some of these videos. This is a kids channel in Gaza, and you can go watch it. I don't have time to play it, but you can go watch this video. And there's one thing I'd say about this video. They're at the supermarket. It's kids. It's YouTube, right? You know, kids go around shops and chat and play games and do silly things. This shop is nicer than any shop in my entire childhood. My whole childhood in Ireland, 1970s, 1980s, this shop is way nicer. So if this is the Warsaw Ghetto, I grew up in something worse than the Warsaw Ghetto in 1970s Ireland. This is not the Warsaw Ghetto. This is a modern place. It's a modern supermarket. It doesn't fit the narrative. Okay, Gaza is the simplest problem in the world. I'm going to have to bail out on the West Bank, which is the most complex problem.
Give us a bit.
All right, look, Gaza is the simplest problem in the world. I actually have a solution to Gaza, and my solution is just stop. That if Hamas just stops the war, stops the rockets, just stops, then you can just live like that all the time. You can have your shops, you can have your cafes, your swimming pools. There's no airstrikes, there's no rockets coming over, there's no ground invasions, nothing. So I actually say this to people online. I say, Gazans should abandon the struggle and pursue shopping and life, and that drives people nuts. But honestly, it's my philosophy. My philosophy is I want everybody to live at peace and be rich after least prosperous. And so I want all those Gazans to live at peace. I want them to enjoy their shops and everything. And there's only one thing that's needed, just abandon the struggle and start getting more selfish and just make Gaza a good place. Now, the West Bank is more complex. I don't know how much we can do about this.
90 seconds.
How can I do the West Bank?
You can do it.
No, I can't. No, I can't do it in 90 seconds.
Give us a bit.
Well, give me a little bit. Look, the West Bank is an absolute mess compared to Gaza. And the real reason it's a mess, or from what I'm talking about here, is that there's no obvious border. So with Gaza, Israel, as you know, eventually gave up on the settlements, kicked 8,000 Jews out, defined a border, that's it. So that's the border, there's not going to be any other border. The West Bank is an absolute mess, it's a mess on all sides, right? I'm not saying it's a great situation. I may not even speak for all pro-Israel people, right? Don't get me wrong, there are different views on the pro-Israel side. It's a mess that has evolved due to history, and you can kind of see various reasons why it evolved, but it's a mess all the same. So have a look at this. No Jews allowed past this sign. So you thought I was going to show you no Palestinians allowed past this sign, but there's also no Jews allowed past this sign because this is Area A. And if Jews go into Area A, they'll have to be rescued by the IDF, and the IDF may lose troops rescuing them from being lynched. So the IDF don't want any Jews to get into Area A and be killed, lynched, held hostage, whatever it is. So this is a sign. The reason I picked this sign is it's outside Jericho. Jericho, if you know your Bible at all, I don't know mine that well, but Jericho is an ancient city of the Jews, right? So Jericho is an ancient Jewish city, and Jews aren't allowed in. So the area outside of Jericho, look at this for an absolute mess. So purple, Jews can live here in this area. Jews lived here for 2,500 years or something, but they can't live here anymore. They can't even go in there anymore without an army escort. Palestinians can't get in here without security checks because of the fear of terrorism. And they can't live there. So the whole thing is an absolute mess. Now, what I would say is that it's a mess. No, okay, I'm going to have to.
1 minute.
Okay, all right. I'll tell you what. Why don't I skip through my slides and I do 5 seconds each.
Sorry, but it's given so much extra time. Is Richard going to get the same additional time?
Why don't we give Richard extra time?
I will.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I don't have a huge lot left, but it's very hard to do the West Bank quickly. So. I'm talking about the current mess of the situation. So I'm not going to be somebody saying, well, this was all great, it was a great idea to end up in this position or whatever. All the decisions everybody made was right. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say it's a mess. So what is the solution to that? Well, first of all, again, and I want you to understand, I think I do speak for most pro-Israel people, that we want all these people here. in the Palestinians who get to live here. We want them to have a good life. And we want all the Jews who live here to have a good life. We don't want the Jews all expelled from here to solve something or other. We don't want the Palestinians all expelled to here. I'd say I speak for 90% of pro-Israel people. Nobody wants anybody expelled. Everybody wants everyone to have a good life. Is that possible? Well, I'm actually here to say no. It's not. At least it's not without some fundamental changes, which probably aren't going to happen. So, but let's have a look. This is, Richard was saying, you visited Israel and the territories in 1987 or something. So these, by the way, they're not my stats. I just graphed this here. The stats are totally independent. This is Palestinian GDP per capita in $1990. Basically, what was happening in 1987 was Palestinian GDP was tripling from the start of the occupation over here up until, you know what happened here, Arafat launches the Intifada and the whole economy goes to hell. So that brutal Israeli occupation that you were complaining about made the Palestinians 3 times richer over that period up until the Intifada.
Okay. I'm putting you off now.
Well,
But I think you can come back later.
okay.
Richard, I'm giving you 3 minutes.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah, look, I'm sure we're going to debate it all on the floor, but just to say, first of all, there was a lot of red herrings, and I think it is instructive that on the critical question of what about the millions of Palestinians who've been displaced since 1948, that there is no answer. So, of course, if you engineer the democracy in such a way that one group is guaranteed to have an inbuilt majority, then you can tolerate and make a few concessions to those Palestinians or Arabs that you allow to get citizenship, to have citizenship. But millions of others are denied that right. And indeed, I mean, I've put this point, I put it to the Israeli ambassador at that time when he came into the Dáil. I said, what about the law of return? What about the rights of Palestinians to return? He said, no, if the Palestinians return, that would fundamentally undermine the Jewish state. He was very clear about it. So it is simply unthinkable for the regime that was established to tolerate the idea that something that is a right for Palestinians under international law, the right to return from the place from which they were displaced, driven by force, using terrorist tactics in 1947-48 with the Nakba, that those people should have the right to return. That will solve the problem. Give them that right, and then let the people democratically decide what sort of state they want. But Israel will not allow that. In fact, it will not even allow people from the West Bank or Gaza who marry Israeli Arab citizens to become resident and citizen in Israel without going through incredible hoops where most of the time they are denied that right to citizenship. Because they want to control the demographics, right? In order to ensure that an ethnic balance is maintained, which discriminates against the Palestinian and Arab population. That's apartheid. And it's not just me that's saying that. I mean, do we honestly believe that Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the UN Special Rapporteur, and you can go on through the list, that they're all describing this as an apartheid regime that's based on, I quote, systematic racism and domination of the Palestinian population? And listen, come on, I mean, the Gaza stuff is just laughable. And there's 2 million people living in an area that is about half the size of Dún Laoghaire, right? That are the conditions. Of course there's a few rich Gazans, of course there is. And I'm sure, and there's rich people in the West Bank. And there's very, very few Palestinians who wouldn't agree with you, by the way, Mark, when you say there's not much democracy in the rest of the Middle East. But look who the allies are of those corrupt, anti-democratic, authoritarian regimes in the rest of the Middle East. The United States and Britain and the Western powers. They back the authoritarian dictatorships in Saudi, in Qatar, the United Emirates, in Egypt, and so on. And you have other rotten powers like Russia backing the Syrian regime. So the idea that somehow that validates Israel, when the very powers that support Israel, who deny the Palestinians their rights, also support all those brutal autocratic regimes in the rest of the region. And in fact, any attempt by the people of the rest of the region to challenge those regimes is usually brutally suppressed with the assistance of big Western powers, who arm the Saudis to the teeth in order to ensure that ordinary people in the rest of the region don't gain the right to democracy and self-determination. So that's a pretty poor argument in my opinion.
Right, okay. We've witnessed our two speakers overcoming their natural shyness to express their views. So feel free to do the same yourself. But for God's sake, keep it short. Okay.
Sorry, could I
Please.
ask one question?
Yeah.
This lady is
Sorry, you were first.
this
Sorry.
lady first. Give your name, please, and if you have any relevant affiliations.
None at all. None at all. Just a quote from the Bible, Genesis 25:12. Now these are generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar, the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham. What does the panel say? Is in fact both Israelis and Palestinians are all from the seed of Abraham.
Okay, we'll give them that opportunity later. We'll take a few more. Now this person here.
Yeah,
Your
sorry, I
name,
just-
please, or
Sorry, my name is Louise Acton. I'm a solicitor, so I'm very interested in laws, international laws. One of the things, and I just wanted to look it up, just the definition of apartheid, which you probably know this, Mark. It's an Afrikaans word, and it literally means separateness and a separate state. And I think if you were to, any objective observer would kind of look and see what's happening in Israel and Palestine, with the Palestinians, certainly the definition of it. But one of the things that's on the Amnesty International website, and I just wanted to ask you, is this true? Because you're not of facts and figures here. And it says most Palestinians in the Israeli occupied territories live under Israeli occupation and are not Israeli citizens. They are not allowed to vote in Israel.
Yeah, that is true, that non-citizens don't vote in Israel. And that was my charge earlier about the elections. They're actually meant to vote in the PA, but the PA doesn't have elections. They don't believe in it.
right. Okay.
That's the
Dermot
problem.
Malidi, is that right?
Yeah.
I remember you from just a few years ago in colleges.
This question is for both speakers, but more especially for Mr. Boyd Barrett. In 1948, during the Israel War of Independence, the Arab forces, which were in the east, were mainly Jordanian Arabs. That Jordanian Arab army managed to, it was powerful enough to expel every Jewish settler or resident from the West Bank, from what's now called the West Bank. Not only were they able to expel the entire ancient Jewish community from Hebron, what was left of it after the 1929 massacre of Jews in Hebron. Not only were they strong enough to do that, they were strong enough to expel every single Jew from the old city of Jerusalem, which was part of then Eastern Jerusalem. So for the following 19 years, from 1948 to 67, the entire land, in fact a bigger area than what's now the West Bank, was under Arab rule, Arab Jordanian rule. 60% of Jordan's own population was Palestinian. Can you explain why, if you are now calling for a Palestinian state to be set up in the West Bank, what we now call the West Bank, Judea, Samaria in the Jewish language, can you explain why in those 19 years neither Jordan nor the Palestinians' own leadership took the opportunity of setting up a Palestinian state then? 19 years of a lost opportunity before they became what's now called Israeli occupied territory.
Good. Yeah,
Yeah, I think once you unleash the logic of ethnic partition, it's going to be horrible, right? And I'm arguing against ethnic partition. So if you're saying there was ethnic cleansing conducted by Jordanian forces, I'm fully willing to accept that fact.
But Palestinian Arabs. Unleashed by Palestinian Arabs.
Once you go down the road of ethnic partition...
But I thought this was only something that Jews did.
No, you said that.
You did.
I didn't, actually.
So
I didn't. I didn't.
Cleansing. That's your entire charge.
Listen, whatever you do, don't put words into my mouth. I never said that, okay? So I'm against the logic of ethnic partition, and I'm arguing for equality and against the principle of separation of people, right? Which the Israeli state is based on. But so what were there atrocities committed against Jewish people as part of that? Almost certainly there were, right? Almost certainly. But you're into the horrible logic of ethnic cleansing. And this is coming from the other side as well. So, for example, just to read you a couple of quotes, Menahem Ushikin, I can't pronounce his name, chairman of the Jewish National Fund, member of the Jewish Agency, 1930. Quote, if there are other inhabitants there, they must be transferred to some other place. We must take over the land. Weitz from the JNF in 1937 says the transfer of Arab population from the area of the Jewish state does serve only one aim, to diminish the Arab population. It also serves a second, no less important aim, which is to evacuate the land presently held and cultivated by the Arabs and thus to release it for the Jewish inhabitants. So this is the logic of ethnic cleansing. And of course, once you unleash that logic, it's going to happen on all sides, right? And it's a tragedy and a disaster, because of course there were Jewish people living all over the Middle East, and in many, some left, but some were undoubtedly persecuted and driven out as a result of this insane logic being unleashed. What I'm arguing is against that logic. We have to get away from the apartheid, racist logic of ethnic segregation, religious segregation, creating hierarchies based on religious or ethnic identity, because it is a terrible logic that leads to permanent conflict and war.
I'll just say one thing. I'm glad you're against deporting any new people, because so am I. So you're obviously against deporting anybody who lives in the settlements in any kind of future, and so am I. I don't think anybody should be deported from anywhere, and we have to find a way forward without any more deportations.
Okay, anything more questions?
Sure.
Gentleman here.
A highly relevant event occurred in February of
do you
this.
want to give us?
Yes, my name is Malcolm Jaffa. From my accent, you might gather I'm originally from Belfast.
You're very welcome here tonight.
I travelled 3 hours in a plane today to be here.
Okay, thank you.
In February of this year, Yusuf Haddad, an Arab Israeli, was invited by the Dublin Parliament, the Oireachtas, to come to Leinster House and tell of his experience being born, brought up, living in Israel, becoming a commander in the Israeli army with Jewish men under him. 20 people went along to the room to hear him speak, and I believe, Mr. Boyd Barrett, you didn't go to hear him speak.
I didn't
know. No. The Dublin media entirely ignored his presence. The Dublin media entirely ignored what he had to say. Newspapers, radio, television, nothing appeared. The only thing that did appear about his visit was a radio station in Cork put out something on a lunchtime. Now, I have written a little pamphlet here, Why Israel is Not an Apartheid State. If anybody would like a copy of this pamphlet, Karen will hand it out. And I would like to tell you about the day I visited the Save a Children's Heart Hospital in Israel in 2018 when I was the escort of 10 members of UK Parliament to Israel. Now on this you will see the role of children at Save a Child's Heart Hospital. Children from all over the world who are being treated in this Israeli hospital. And in the last 25 years, this hospital has examined 9,500 plus children and saved 6,000 children, including 2,000 from the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. This hospital has trained 140 medical professionals from many countries. I'd like to read you the names of the professionals who were there on the day I was there in 2018. By the way, I took this photograph of the role of the children at the hospital when I was there that day. This is the reproduction of that photograph. I'd like to tell you of the names of the medical professionals who are being trained in that hospital on that day. Dr. Rachel, anesthesiologist from Ethiopia. Dr. El Karam, surgeon from the Palestinian Authority. Dr. Zaror, surgeon from the Palestinian Authority. Dr. Yarad, surgeon from Ethiopia. Dr. Olsand, cardiologist from Kenya. Dr. Silvera, surgeon from Tanzania. Dr. Hamid, anesthetist, Palestinian Authority. Dr. Hamad, another anesthetist from the Palestinian Authority. And Dr. Gamishu from Ethiopia. But these are medical professionals being trained in an Israeli hospital. I was standing there, seeing this cardiac unit. These professionals have been trained to send these professionals back to their own country. Now,
Other people are trying to get in.
yes, Yosef Haddad, who spoke in the Dáil in February of this year, said very clearly that Israel is not an apartheid state. If you would like to look at this booklet, you will see reproduced from Google what he said and why he said that Israel is not an apartheid state. Do you think, Dr. Boyd Barrett, that you know better than him?
Well,
Is that a question?
well, let you
Okay.
I'm very pleased that you've been awarded. Thank you. We'll let Richard in on this later. I want to take a few more. Somebody else, you were in your name,
Yes,
please.
Melissa Halpin. I'm a counsellor with People Before Profit. And I suppose I have two comments on just
You're a counsellor, sorry.
with People Before Profit.
Okay.
Yeah, I have two comments and just a couple of questions for Mark. First of all, I do think it's incorrect really to equate regular elections automatically with democracy, and it should be more about who is entitled to vote in elections. Because okay, we can quite easily have elections where one section of the population are allowed to vote and the others aren't. And the problem, as I see it, and I suppose it was the first time I kind of understood and became a kind of pro-Palestinian campaigner, was around the idea that there are different levels. There are citizenship, two different levels of citizenship in Israel. You can be a citizenship with a nationality and be a citizen who is denied a nationality at all within Israel. And then you can fight all your life for a citizenship that you were denied and put through the hoops for. And to my mind, that you have to judge it more on being allowed, the numbers of people allowed to vote. So I suppose that's my first comment. My second comment is, my question then is about the amnesty report. It's for other people here. It's a 280-page report. It's not that asserts that Israel is guilty of apartheid, and it goes through it's incredibly forensic. It goes through absolutely all layers of back and forth around this is what we saw, this is what we saw, this is what we discovered, and this is what we're writing down. That there's an intent to oppress and dominate the Palestinian people. There's a fragmentation of people into domains of control. There's segregation and control. There's a dispossession of land and property. There's deprivation of economic and social rights. There's forcible transfer, administrative detention and torture, unlawful killings, and it goes on. What is your answer to that? And is it only Amnesty International's report on Israel that you have an issue with, or do you have an issue with Amnesty International in general? And my last comment is on do not equate people who are pro-Palestinian with having no issue with any other country in the Middle East. I am furious about Iran, absolutely livid about what's happening in Iran at the moment. And you cannot make statements like that and say, why is this the only thing that people are worried about? I'm worried about countries, or I'm worried about America. I can't believe the numbers of people who are not allowed vote in their every 4-year election without a shadow of a doubt. You have it, it's in November, he comes to power in January, but the numbers of people who are not allowed vote in those elections because they somehow were on the wrong side of the wall at the wrong time, and they're not allowed, they have some kind of record, and they're absolutely put out of voting. My sister, who's lived there for 40 years and has a resident there for 35 years, is not allowed to vote. It's the right to vote in the country that makes that country a democracy rather than the regular election.
Thank you. I'm going to take two more and let the speakers in. The gentleman with the beard.
When he lets me.
Sure you will.
Gentleman with the beard. Your name, please.
My name is Jerry Coughlin. I have no particular occupation there. And my point is to the panel, particularly Mr. Boyd Barrett. Your solution basically is a one-state solution, rather than any kind of ethnic nationalism, essentially. But the fact of the matter is that's for the birds. It's not going to happen. Most Israelis don't even support the two-state solution anymore. A fact which the Irish government somehow hasn't grasped after 20 years. I mean, it's just completely dead in the water. There's not going to be a one-state solution. The Israeli state will not abolish itself. It's just not going to happen. So we have to find some other kind of solution apart from that. It's completely impractical. There's a single Israeli politician who get elected in that time. And it's just not going to happen. So why can't people like you come up with a reasonable, even theoretical, reasonable solution? Because one-state solution is just not going to happen.
Okay, a lady there.
Yeah, I have two questions.
Your name, please.
Short. My name is Clara O'Loughlin. I have no affiliation. I just wanted to know if you painted a lovely picture of Gaza there. When was the last time you took your family and holidays there? Or do you have them for next year? And the second question is, you said it's as simple as people in Gaza putting down their hands and admitting defeat and getting over the struggle. Would it not be a lot more simple for the stronger Israeli Defence Force to stop battering them rather than, there's mechanisms in Israel that can stop their crappy little rockets from coming over it. Would it not make more sense for the stronger people to stop? Or would you have said to maybe Irish nationalists 100 years ago that they should just give up and they'd be better off if they gave up the struggle and allowed the UK to roll over?
Okay, take you first.
Sure, okay. Will I do you first then? Yes. You were saying what people are allowed to vote, and that is a good question. Citizens are allowed to vote, and non-citizens aren't. And there was meant to be a settlement where non-citizens vote for the Palestinian Authority. And right now in Gaza, for example, non-citizens in Gaza can be just voting away. They can have a little democracy there. Israel would absolutely love it if there was a democracy in Gaza. Likewise, if the Palestinian Authority held elections, Israel would love it as well. So Israel is not against these people having a vote. The problem is that our idea that people should have a vote, I'm afraid, is not an idea held by the powerful among the Palestinian society. It's not an idea held by their clerics or their political leaders, and frankly not by a lot of their people either. That they don't believe in this concept of democracy, and if they did, you could claim that people believe in it and the powerful have stopped them, but I'm not seeing that there is a frustration that they don't have a parliament and all the things that we regard as democracy on the West Bank or in Gaza. And I know Hamas might cheat you if you say we need a parliament in Gaza, or whatever.
The elections are recognised.
But they don't have elections. They haven't had one since. That was in 2006.
As you recall.
Yeah, so what's stopping them having another one? That was in 2006. Right? Anyway, look, you said on the Amnesty report, you said it's long. I know how long it is. It's 280 pages long. I started with the executive summary, which is 25 pages. It's a massive report. You should read the NGO Monitor reply, which is 154 pages, just as exhaustive, footnoted, throughout. Amnesty go through hundreds of topics. They all require pages to reply to. But I did notice that they started their big chance to make their case on the very first opening of the executive summary was the Sheikh Jarrah case, which is the most ridiculous thing to start with, a case that spent decades in the courts, and that's an example of the oppression of the poor Palestinian people. Did they not have any better material, was how I felt reading it. You said, do I only dislike them in Israel? No, I dislike Amnesty on a bunch of issues, I'm afraid. I think they're a completely corrupted organisation. You said you're angry about Iran, that's great, and people are, but if you actually look at how often organisations like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch talk about Iran or Syria or any of these countries compared to Israel, it's absolutely tiny. How often they talk about North Korea, how often they talk about any kind of unfashionable, less fashionable cause. Israel is right at the top of what Amnesty and Human Rights Watch bang on about all the time. Your question was, do I visit Gaza? Well, actually, Israelis used to visit Gaza.
Do you bring your family?
No,
Bring your children?
I wouldn't get into. I'd be killed. I mean, I wouldn't be allowed in. I'd be killed. I wouldn't be safe. But Israelis used to go to Gaza. They used to go there on holiday
So
before
when were the photos from?
before the second Intifada, I guess, if my facts are right.
They're not really relevant to the conversation.
They're no way.
They're not really relevant to
What
the
aren't?
conversation. The photographs of
No, those photographs. They're not my photos.
people you shared them.
Yeah, but those are modern photos of people.
From
In fact,
pre to
they're
later.
actually those photos. Some of those photos are posted by Gazans who want people to see how lovely the place is.
Well,
Hamas.
sorry, you know when they were taken?
Oh yeah, that's 2015 or something like that. Hamas made a video saying how wonderful Gaza was to sell it to their own people and say, look what.
You
Hold on, can I just finish that?
But you're just dodging the question. You wouldn't
What's
go
the
there
question?
because it's dangerous.
Of course.
It's not nice. You wouldn't
It's
go
dangerous
there.
for me.
You just showed that there to try and make it seem like people who say that things are terrible in Gaza are just exaggerating, and look how lucky and look how great it is. All these Arabs got jobs. We let
Yeah,
them
but
have
Jews have
jobs.
Jews have been murdered there. That's the problem with Gaza.
Okay.
It's not that they're living in.
Sorry.
It's not that there aren't nice things there. No Jew. You know, no Jew could go into Gaza, right? They'd be murdered immediately.
So why are
Okay.
you showing us?
With the Palestinians
Because
in Gaza
the Palestinians who live in Gaza, some of them live an okay life. When Hamas aren't firing and PIJ aren't firing hundreds of rockets over. So I actually have an answer, which is you stop firing rockets and you just live in the moment. Try to make the place a better place. Try to build businesses like those shops, the supermarkets you can see. Your solution is something more magical.
It's the exact same thing. Except
No,
Israel.
it's not, because if Israel did nothing about those rockets, there would be rockets 24/7, 365.
They're throwing rocks more
I
than
think we'll
rockets.
give Richard a chance
Yeah,
to
sorry.
overcome his natural shyness and like
Listen, I'm a citizen of Israel. I'm a Christian. I lived there over 30 years. You don't know what you're talking about.
I think first of all that the fact that somebody who's of Arab origin, for example, just to relate to your point, it might indicate support for the state of Israel. I mean, that's, it's not unimportant testimony. It's not. I'm not saying it's unimportant testimony, but I don't think it sort of wins the argument any more than Irish people who would have asserted allegiance or loyalty to Britain prior to Irish independence would have meant that everybody in Ireland was happy with the situation under British rule, because you would have found Irish people who worked with the British colonial regime in Ireland who would have said yes, and they went out and fought for Britain and so on. But I think we know that was not representative. And I think, to be honest, Joseph Haddad's views are not representative of the vast majority of Palestinians. They certainly. Pardon? I know you want to define. If I can just respond to the points, you want to define the issue purely in terms of those who are Israeli citizens, right? And the point is, first of all, I don't accept that, but neither do the vast majority of Palestinians, and neither is international law. And I know it's noticeable that in a lengthy debate the other side have not once responded to the question of whether the Palestinian refugees have a right to return. Not once. Okay? 7 million of them. And there's a very simple reason for that. Because that would change the entire equation. But under international law, the Palestinians have the right to return. And when you say...
They do not.
They do.
Sorry, how did
There's a UN
600,000
resolution.
Palestinian refugees become 7 million?
First of all, there was about 900,000 people, 7 to 900,000 expelled during 1947.
How did they become 7 million?
Because they then went because they then went to live in Syria and Damascus, in Syria and Jordan and all across the Middle East and in Lebanon and all across the world, and their children and their grandchildren and their great grandchildren.
So where else in the
All
world
of
is
whom. Sorry, I
refugee
didn't
status
interrupt you.
inherited?
I didn't interrupt you. But you see, this is the problem with, I think, challenging the Israeli state, to be honest.
Where else is it inherited?
Because what happens to Palestinians who challenge the Israeli state is they suffer brutal repression and then military assault and just denial of the most basic rights. And that is the problem. But if on your point about the one-state solution, you see, you can think it up, down and sideways. Either you end up with segregation, which is what, and even Mark's map shows that. I mean, it's horrible when you think about it. The Jews here, the Arabs here, it's disgusting. That's apartheid. That's what Bantustans looked like in apartheid South Africa. And this is all under Israeli military control. That's what apartheid looks like. Now, I think we have to challenge that logic. Now, if you can think of a better way out, I'm all ears. I'm genuinely all ears, and I think the Palestinian people will be all ears. But to me, the only way you can navigate your way out of that mess is through saying there are basic principles of democracy, freedom, human rights, and self-determination, which should determine the future outcome of this. Right? That's my view.
It's all theoretical.
Well, I don't think it is theoretical, but I understand why you would say that. But the current situation is a recipe for ongoing, permanent conflict because it's based on the ethnic partition of people. And anywhere where you've had ethnic partition has been a disaster. There's not a place in the world that it hasn't spelled permanent, horrible, racist conflict. There's nowhere.
On here.
Your name, please. Joseph Haddad isn't the Palestinian.
Your name is Joseph Haddad.
What's your name here? Here on your
My
name.
name is Kieran, and I'm with Dún Laoghaire.
Okay.
Second point, we're all the way to the idea that Palestinian refugees have right to return to their land, to their home, is that refugees, Jewish refugees from Arab countries who went to flee Israel should also be allowed to return to Egypt, Syria, Iraq, to reclaim their houses and their lands. I mean, that's not going to happen. That's the other reason why it's one safe solution. Because the Egyptians, Syrians, the Iraqis, they're not going to hand the houses back to the Jews that the stolen them. I mean, that isn't good for the home. So if you want Palestinians to go back to Israel and take back their lands, then Jews should also do that. Jews do, by the number of Jewish Israelis are Arab extraction. Descendants of Arab refugees. They're never the majority of Israeli Jews. Think of their return, reclaim their lands. You seriously think that the Iraqis and the Egyptians think that Israeli Jews to back and take back all the property?
There's a gentleman down at the back now. I hope you've got a good loud voice. What's your name, please? You want to come up to the front for a minute?
Sure, thanks very much. My name is Frank Humphries.
Frank Humphries.
Yeah, exactly.
Rings a bell.
In the interest of full disclosure.
I'm Mark's brother, but I must say they're your brother as well.
Well,
Regarding as a pal, so.
But a brother of both.
We were in the same school,
yeah,
us two.
Exactly. So,
Well, but are you related to both speakers?
oh God. We're all related. We're all descendants of Muhammad and Charlotte.
Okay, your question.
But anyway, so yeah, my background is I spent the best part of a decade working with journalists trying to improve media coverage of global development issues. And part of that is getting them to focus on the big picture, the big issues that were killing millions of children every year, which were not as sexy or as exciting or as emotional as you know what America's supporting or what Israel is doing or who's blowing things up. And these things are still massively neglected. Nobody cares. There's a famine early warning system. You can follow on Twitter. Nobody tweets who likes what they're doing, and they're pointing out common things far ahead of what happens. So that's what kind of bothers me. One of the things that bothers me about the attention this conflict gets is that it diverts attention away from other places. It diverts enormous amounts of aid. The West Bank and Gaza are in the top 10 aid recipients, despite having a tiny population. And it's not an especially poor place GDP per capita. Obviously, I'm not against, there's great inequality, as the chap that Mark pointed out there, and Twitter points out, there's great inequality in Gaza, but the status quo. So what all this attention has done is just maintain the status quo. All this anti-Israel focus has achieved nothing, as this Amnesty International report would do. So there is a possibility for the anti-Israel side to keep their views and actually be pro-Palestinian if they just shift focus a little bit to what actually would be pro-Palestinian. So to call on an end to our resistance, to call for democracy and human rights in the Palestinian territories, and most importantly, perhaps, to call for rights for these 7 million people to be given citizenship where they are, for these refugee camps to be closed down, for UNRWA to be disbanded. And then you won't have the same leverage call for a right of return, but you can still call for it, it doesn't stop it. But it means that these refugees that have been pawns for over 70 years are no longer treated as pawns by activists. And I think both pro-Israeli and imagined pro-Palestinians should be able to unite on these topics.
How are we doing here? Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes. Your name, please.
I always find it.
Name.
Oh, Cyril Thomas. I always find it rather sad that the political West, in which I grew up as a young person, and as a young person, we were very sympathetic to Israel, to the socialist kibbutzim, to a country where there was freedom of speech, a country composed of people who fought against fascism and Nazism. And yet the political left of today has been overtaken by this overwhelming anti-Jewish prejudice that it seems to me refuses to consider the facts that Dr. Mark Humphrys has presented, that in the millions of square miles across North Africa and across the Middle East, in which we find numerous Arab countries, where many of which, where there is little freedom or political rights, we don't hear the political left protesting about the rights of people. For example, in Saudi Arabia, where there is no political freedom or freedom of speech, all the hostility is directed against one nation, the only democracy in the Middle East, Israel. And it does seem tragic to me that we're talking about refugees from a conflict that took place over 74 years ago. And why is it that the Palestinian refugees are living in second or third class conditions in refugee camps, for example, in Lebanon? Is because the Lebanese government has kept them in those camps and denied them any professional rights. Why is it, Mr. Richard Boyd Barrett, you are not directing your efforts to protest against the apartheid which is directed against Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and Jordan? I would just appeal to you, Mr. Barrett, as one of your constituents, that You're championing people before profits. How about principles before prejudice? The genuine rights of Palestinians before prejudice. Come on, let's open up to the facts, the objective facts, and let's start championing Israel, which is the only democracy in the Middle East.
In the orange shirt.
Thanks, Dave O'Keefe. I'm also speaking before profit. Just on that point, particularly on Mark's facts, based on those facts, I think I'll be down to budget travel tomorrow. It looks like a nice place to visit. if I can find a flight, I'll find it out. The other thing I want to chime in, which kind of boils my blood, like I don't know, Mark, if you would tell a victim of abuse, just stop fighting back. Just, be quiet, say nothing, and they'll leave you alone. Maybe you would, I don't know much about you, right? And the other gentleman over here mentioned that the 2,000 or so Arab children saved by this Israeli hospital. Fantastic, that's great. Unfortunately, it kind of coincides with the 2,200 children since 2000 who've been killed by the Israeli military. It's very easy to point to nice things that Israel has done, which are fantastic. Like, that's great. But you can't just blindly point to them. I'm fully for supporting medical aid all over the world for educating people from all creeds, from all ethnic backgrounds. But you can't just highlight good things, pick a couple of nice pictures, and say, "Oh, you're all talking nonsense." It's lovely over there. Israel's a democracy because of these very select facts that I put on my PowerPoint. It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah, right. This lady here.
Hi. My name is Adi Ufir-Moaz. I'm the Deputy Head of Vision for Israel.The State in Ireland. I have one simple question for you, of course. The first one is, I read before I came about you, and I haven't found a single place which kibbutz you have been. So I would like you to share with us.
Moshav Nyot. Moshav, not Nyot Hakikar.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I would like to talk about Gaza, and I hope people here would, maybe I can educate some people about the precedents of Gaza. The Gaza Strip was, the government of Israel decided to evacuate every Israeli presence in 2005 from Gaza. There is no Israeli presence there. The problem is that in the election the Hamas took over, and they're right now under Hamas. And everything going on in Gaza is Hamas ruling. The second thing about your, how do you call this? Crappy little rockets, and they throw stones at us. Last year, at the time of 10 days, 9,000 rockets shooted at Israel. This is not stones. I'm sorry. I don't know how much you are educated on
many
the issue.
rockets were on the other side?
No. No rockets have been fired. No rockets have been fired.
They're targeting military installations.
I'll take part to copy the rockets. So, and the third issue I would like to address is their return rights. So, more than 50% of the people of the West Bank have left because the Arab countries that were about to attack in 1948 told them, leave, we're going to occupy this land very soon, you can come back. So they just pick up their stuff and left. The second thing, Jordan, the area that was called, under the mandate ruling that was called Palestine, was also Jordan. Why aren't they coming back to Jordan? Why isn't Jordan Palestine? If you have an answer to this.
Okay.
Chair.
I
just make one comment.
30 seconds.
30 seconds, yeah. Just on the issue of, rockets versus bombs, etc. I do think the question has to be answered by anybody who isn't pro-Palestinian. The death toll in all the different wars that have gone over the last year is pretty much always 100 to 1 on the side of Palestinians. You look at the death toll of Kasla, 1,400 Palestinians, the vast majority of whom were civilians, to 13 Israelis. And that figure of 100 to 1, and it's funny, I've watched it over the years, and it's pretty much in and around. Okay, so I'm going a little bit lower, a little bit above, but it's pretty much in and around. So you can make your arguments about rockets, about how many rockets, but when you look at the death toll and you look at the death toll of civilians, there's an inequality there that you just cannot get away from.
But you don't want them to stop.
Okay.
You don't want them to
I
stop.
want there to be.
So he doesn't want them to stop.
Apologize for inventing
How dare you say I don't want to stop?
The Gazans.
Order.
You want the
I
Gazans.
want the killing.
Do you want the Gazans to stop right now?
Stop fighting right.
How many was killed by the Hamas rockets misfiring?
100 to 1.
Okay, now.
Do you want Gazans to stop? I'm still confused whether you want them to stop or not.
It's 9:05, so listen, folks. Things are getting tight. So I'm going to give the lads 5 minutes each, max.
Yeah, we go the opposite way this time.
You sure?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah.
All right.
Well, look, I happen to have some slides here, so let's just go. Look, basically, I love this. Your GDP increases 3 times. You've got a nice society. You've got shops. Maybe you've got tourism if you don't kill the tourists. That's the future. I hate this. This is Arafat and suicide bombing buses. There are a vast number. There's 100,000. There's now 200,000 work permits for Palestinians, and that's what we want to see. We want to see Palestinians participating in the Israeli economy. Look at their life expectancy. Mr. Boyd Barrett has this whole narrative about how brutal the whole thing has been for Palestinians. Take a look at their life expectancy. This is our world in data. The data is out there. Their life expectancy rockets ever since occupation began. The rockets up. Here is life expectancy. Gaza and the West Bank have higher life expectancy than Jordan, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, and even Turkey, which sends aid to Gaza on ships full of jihadis. They've higher life expectancy. How does that happen? So, is there any solution to the West Bank? Solution to Gaza, there is. Some of you don't like it, but the solution is to just stop and you choose life, as they say. The West Bank, I don't think there's any solution. The solutions that tend to be offered on that side are just insecurity, so everybody can go everywhere. Well, that just means suicide bombs everywhere. So end the checkpoints, demolish the wall. Number 3, bloodbath. The other thing, now in fairness, Mr. Boyd Barrett doesn't seem to want deportations or anything, which is great, because some people do, which is we're going to get everybody out from the 1967 borders, deport all the settlers. There are loads of people who want that. You ethnically cleanse 0.6 million Jews, and if you can live with that, then you get a bloodbath. So you don't get any kind of reward for this ethnic cleansing, which is a terrible crime to begin with, but it doesn't even achieve anything. Right? Absolute disaster. The third option is a bit more like Mr. Boyd Barrett's, which is a one-state solution. He may or may not bring in back the 7 million people, 95% of whom never lived in Israel. So you bring them all back. Again, I believe that would be a bloodbath. I'm just reporting what would happen. So I don't think there is any solution, except there's no solution to this terrible mess here, except there is one solution. There's only one solution, and that's it.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah. I just want to quote Benjamin Netanyahu, first of all, posting it in 2019. He said, "Israel is not a state for all of its citizens, but rather the nation state of the Jewish people and only them." Right? That's Netanyahu. And I mean, to be honest, some of the comments of some of the other people who were in his cabinet about Palestinians being snakes, less than animals, and so on, go and read this stuff for yourself. It's filthy stuff. I mean, it's really beyond foul. But this is the logic since the beginning of the state. And I've read out the quotes, and I can read out some more. Ben Gurion, first Prime Minister, said a few months after he came into office, said, "The Arabs of the land of Israel had but one function left, to run away." And it was absolutely clear in all of the papers and articles that were written by the Zionist organizations, the plan was to mass transfer the Palestinians to displace them. And that's what's happened. And the speakers who are defending the status quo here, if you listen very carefully, it's absolutely clear what they're saying, that all those who are expelled, who have descent, and we'll get on to the point about who were not born in Israel, right? But just think about the logic of this. These are people who have descent, either their parents, their grandparents, their great-parents, can identify their connection with the land of Palestine or Israel or whatever you want to call it. And those defending Israel are saying they can never have the right to come back. That's it. It will be a bloodbath, it will be a disaster. You can put all the excuses you want, but they're not coming back. We're not letting them back. But the basic law of the Israeli state is any Jewish person from anywhere in the world can claim automatic citizenship in Israel. You don't even have to show a connection of any description. So Palestinians whose parents or grandparents or great-grandparents had land and farmed and lived in villages and have connections and so on, who can show their connection to the land of Palestine, you're never coming back. But any Jewish person from anywhere in the world, purely on the grounds of their ethnic and religious identity, has the right to live in Israel. That is apartheid. There's no other way to describe it. And it is a terrible logic, because of course the Palestinian people are never going to accept that. Ever. Right? They will resist that to the end. And when Mark says they should just give up, I mean, honest to God, it's just fantasy. The Palestinians will never stop resisting to assert their rights. Now, do I think armed resistance is the best way forward? I don't.
Then why do you quote? You're here on Twitter saying from the river to the sea, Palestine.
Absolutely, from the river to the sea.
What does that mean?
Palestine, that means one state where everybody has freedom, where everybody has freedom and self-determination. And to say, really, you see, that's when we're really descending into the gutter, when people make statements like that. Right? And I'm just not going to stand for that kind of stuff.
I know what you stand for.
Right? Yeah.
I know what
okay, but you see, that's just,
I know what you stand for.
that's foul. And it brings to mind another quote, and I'll just read this, a former Attorney General of Israel. I'll just read this out. Former Attorney General of Israel. It is with great sadness that I must also conclude that my country has sunk to such political and moral depths that it is now an apartheid state. It is time for the international community to recognise this reality as well. Okay, and that is sadly, tragically, the reality. He's quoted in the Amnesty report. He's a former attorney, so it's in the Amnesty report. And if we're making references to documents, I would encourage people to go and do their own research. Read Ben White's book, Israel, Apartheid, Beginner's Guide. Read Elaine Papp, Israeli Jewish historian, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. The person who actually politicized me after I came back from Palestine was a man called Yigael Gluckstein, who was born in Mandate, Palestine, whose family were Zionists, but he was so disgusted at the logic of Zionism as they moved towards the establishment of the state, he politically took up against it as a socialist and trade unionist, because he said this is the absolute antithesis of what being socialist is about. Because it is about dividing people along lines of ethnicity and religion. And that, tragically, is what the Israeli state is doing. So I think it is if you believe in freedom, self-determination, and human rights, the only thing you can do is say that this system of apartheid and ethnic cleansing has to be fully dismantled.
It's been such a quiet, subdued gathering. I'm just glad that some of you were able to overcome your natural charms and actually disagree with our authoritative speakers, our infallible speakers. And thank you to both, and thank you to all the contributors. Sorry I had to cut some of you off. I brought back a lot of memories for me, of being in Knesset once actually, and the Palestinian members Arab members or whatever were so rowdy that they made the Haiti Rays look like monks in a silent monastery. But I've haunting memories of a visit to Gaza 20 years ago and meeting some children on the beach who were intrigued by this funny looking old man sitting on the sand with his note, going through his notes and just wondering, 20 years on how they have fared. And then another haunting memory of when a suicide bombing took place when I was in Jerusalem and going to the scene and seeing the desolation.
Can you speak up a bit?
Going to the scene of a suicide bombing in Jerusalem and seeing the aftermath and the horror of it, and also I did a series with my photographer colleague Frank Miller, who lives around here, visiting the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, which is also a very moving experience. And while I'm very proud to be Irish, I'm not that proud of our record in taking in Jewish refugees historically, and wasn't our finest hour, I have to say. And of course, one of the, maybe perhaps the main reason for Israel's existence is to ensure that it will always be a place where a Jewish person can go, to escape persecution. And thank you to two very honest and very principled speakers, and thank you to the perceptive and articulately opinionated questioners from the audience. It's been a great night. Thank you.